Yeah.
Well, I'm not
Okay,
clear as to
then in fact that should bias us against our finding.
well, you know, it would be good to control for those things. I mean,
Fair enough.
look at external controls.
Fair enough.
Because we're only looking at domestic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Professor, I
Yeah.
have questions about the theory. Giving our time to understanding, in some part, you said it's that there's a different cost for leaders of authoritarian regime and also opposition. Sort of, they come along with each other, and then the regime shows that their toughness to the signature. But the opposition, when party has a competition with the leaders, and then oppositions raise the cost for the leaders signing up to the signatory, doesn't mean that it shows that the regime itself is weak. I mean, the argument can go the other way.
No, it can't go the other way because of the monotonicity of the types. The fact that what's crucial in order to make sure that the argument goes in the way that I say it does is that you multiply the type by the amount of torture. Okay? So that when you signal that you're signing, it is more costly for higher types. So we have what's called in signaling games a single crossing property. Okay? If indeed it was the other way around, if it was cheaper for higher types to sign, then we'd have exactly the opposite result. Okay? But because everybody understands that it's going to cost more, that is the probability, that is your expected punishment is rising both in whether you've signed the agreement and in the level of torture you've actually committed. I think that's a reasonable assumption, right? That your expected punishment rises with whether or not you've signed the treaty and how much torture you've actually done. If that is reasonable and you understand that, then it must be the case that signing the treaty signals that you're a tough type or that you have a lower marginal cost of repression. Okay, and that simply follows from the single crossing property of signaling games.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one question. I think the way I understand the theory is that the crux of the theory is that the top countries are more likely to sign the treaty, right?
Correct.
And the index you showed us is that the countries that sign the treaty, they survive long.
Correct.
I think there's a little bit of gap. Although I see that index is coming from one of the implications of the theory.
Correct.
So, and this is my suggestion, I guess, is that if you show that top countries are more likely to sign the treaty, that would be perfect to showing that okay, there's indeed a value to the model, right?
Well, no, the model makes a very explicit prediction about regime survival. So it's a direct test of the regime survival proposition that falls straight out of the model. You're right, it would also be nice if we could test toughness, but measuring toughness is very hard.
But I mean, I think you have some measures of the level of torture, right?
Yes, we do measure the level of torture.
And that can be used as a measure of the toughness, maybe.
Well,
It's endogenous.
it's endogenous. That's the point. Torture is determined endogenously in the model. There is, however, another prediction that the model makes that we can test, that I haven't shown you the results of, and I'll give you a little sneak peek, which is that the model makes a very explicit prediction that if you sign, then the level of domestic opposition should actually fall. Okay? And indeed, in the next version of the paper, we will be showing some evidence in terms of strikes, violence, civil war deaths, all of those sorts of things, that indeed signing leads to reduced domestic opposition, which is also consistent with the story. So I think that while I'm a big fan of that point in 95% of the work that I read, I'm going to claim that this is that rare instance where there's a very nice tight link between the theory, well, as much as I can possibly claim, between the theory and the inference. Yeah?
You touched on this point earlier, but I just wanted to follow up on it. The propensity to torture and the propensity to resist are both given by nature.
The marginal costs.
The marginal costs.
Yes.
Yeah. The willingness to sign the treaty then becomes a signal.
Signal.
And if the government signs, it's signaled that it's a tough government, that it has a low marginal cost of torture.
Correct.
A higher propensity to torture.
Correct.
And the opposition reasonably, as you're suggesting right now, reasonably concludes that it's not worth it to resist.
Correct.
Reduces its level of resistance.
Correct.
But by not signing the convention, you're also sending a signal.
Correct.
You're sending a signal that you have a high cost of
Correct.
torture. And the opposition ought to respond then
By increasing it.
increasing the level of
Correct.
resistance. You suggested a moment ago, or several moments ago, that the data was ambiguous on this point, but the prediction.
No, what I said is that I in the next version of the paper, I'm going to have show tables where if you sign, we see domestic opposition go down, and if you don't sign, well, relative to countries that don't sign, which I think is your point.
Right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So presumably, if you don't sign, again,
if you don't sign,
if the propensities are given by nature, then you should see greater resistance and more torture.
Yeah, but in some sense, there isn't a date.
There's no event.
There's no event where we can which we can condition on,
Yeah.
right? Whereas the signing, we can condition on that date. That's the difficulty with it.
Okay.
So the argument is largely based on the fact that there is an additional cost to signing
Correct.
the agreement. But if there are countries who are not compliant with extradition laws, wouldn't that cost be arguably minimal, just opportunity cost of living in a country that complies with extradition versus living in a state that has known to not comply?
Go to Authors Anonymous is attractive places to go as fast.
Sure, but I think
Paris is where you
but
live.
but isn't that the cost that we're talking about? Just the opportunity cost of living in a
Indeed.
state.
Indeed. Indeed. What matters for the story is that there is some non-trivial difference in the costs associated with engaging in torture, whether you sign as opposed to not signing. Now, whether we can do comparative statics on that, with are we going to be living in a world where there will be a lot of extradition or a world where there's going to be little extradition? I don't know the answer to that, and one should sort of think about that in terms of the model. All I need for this to work is that there's a little gap, okay, between the costs in the two worlds.
Don't you need a fairly good size gap?
Well, yeah, I need a fairly good size. Thank you.
Let's assume for a minute that you're advising one of authoritarian regime leaders, and you suggest that if you torture them, right, you're actually going to stay in office longer.
Well, no, I would say sign the cat. You won't have to torture as much, and you'll stay in office longer.
So what would be the trade-off? That is, how much longer do you stay in office, assuming that you have an increase in this torture?
That's a good question.
Given that you have signed.
That's a really...
basically the story that you are trying to...
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question, but that's a really good question. What's the marginal effect of signing the thing on survival in office? The magnitude? I don't know. I'm gonna go back and find that out.
Because that's actually the whole story.
Yes.
If it's minimal,
Then you're right.
It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can see from. What do we have? We have here, right, that the probability of leaving office essentially is more than halved in any year, right? From this data, right? So you can see that you've got a 4% chance of being thrown out of office after 10 years in office in any particular year, in the 10th year, and that's less than half of it if you've signed the cap. So that's the magnitudes that I do have. Yeah.
But we don't know how much torturing you're doing. You're torturing.
Yes.
As opposed to.
Yes. I agree with you.
And likewise, if you put that graphic back.
I'm sorry.
If you're advising the government, or if the government simply read your paper.
Generally, I run as fast as I can away from authoritarian. In fact, I have a history of doing that.
So your model suggests that they're familiar with the implications of Articles 4 and 5.
Oh yeah, and Pinochet clearly was, in fact.
And there are possibilities of visits to future visits to
Correct.
France.
Right.
But they've read your paper now,
Yeah.
and they realize that by virtue of failing to sign, there's a greater likelihood that opposition will rise up in the streets, torture will actually rise in their society,